So you guys know that the whole Taiwan chips discussion was basically nonsense, right? There are real industrial details there, real capacities that are present on the island of Taiwan and nowhere else. But the whole conversation was surrounded by just such a sea of propaganda and military industrial complex blathering that made zero sense. I had intended for years to go into this in greater detail and talk about it, do like a big debunking video, but now I'm kind of realizing that I'm running out of time because it's a narrative that's looking sillier and sillier as time goes on. It's becoming very clear that the US government was never actually serious about doing anything about this, and neither was the national security community more broadly, and it now seems like China has almost completely punctured the balloon, which I may talk about a bit at the end. So always meant to do like a bigger, deeper dive on this, but now I'm beginning to wonder why I should bother. But I do want to go on the record as just talking about how silly this whole Taiwan chip semiconductor narrative was. And thankfully there was a Q&A and a podcast. So today we're just going to unproduced run that answer to that question, as well as some additional details I'll throw in as we go along. But yeah, fundamentally the whole like Taiwan chip semiconductor narrative wrapped up with AI nonsense, wrapped up with national security nonsense, just wasn't really a thing. And we'll talk about that and the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company and its strategic importance or lack thereof right now.
Question from Lobotomized says, you said in an old shorts video that the idea of the world being dependent on TSMC in Taiwan is propaganda, and that it's all not so important. Can you expand on that? I hear the opposite talking point all the time, and I don't know how to respond to these people. Is TSMC important? Yes, it is an important component of world supply chains.
Is it Taiwanese Semiconductor Company? Is that what it stands for?
Taiwanese Semiconductor Manufacturing Corporation.
Ah, that's it.
And I feel like this is it an important company that actually exists? Yes. Would it be difficult for the United States to supply certain functions of high-tech manufacturing were Taiwan to be destroyed for a period of time? Yes, certainly. But the way that people talk about this is as if it's some kind of like magical token that only grows on the island of Taiwan.
Seems like it. But is it the idea that like the modern world will collapse without them?
There's the idea that the modern world will collapse without them, which is nonsense. There is the idea that I've seen like this is actually advanced as like a savvy strategy, which is perhaps just an indication of just how blown out of proportion this issue is people are like, well, to keep Taiwan safe, we just need to make it clear that there's like a doomsday device for the Chinese government. And like, if they try to take Taiwan, we'll blow up TSMC's factories and they won't have any fabs. And it's just like the degree of insane ignorance of Chinese history that you would have to imagine that China wants to take Taiwan so it can take over some chip factories is nonsense. It is Taiwan. Just to clarify, China is not trying to invade Taiwan for chip factories. China is trying to invade Taiwan because it has always maintained that Taiwan is the legitimation of the Chinese Communist Party is, yes, economic success, but it is the reuniting of China, the making up for the century of humiliation. It is the national resurgence and reuniting of China, and Taiwan is the last unresolved piece.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea that Taiwan would be worthless to China if we blew up some chip factories.
Oh yeah.
And that's the idiocy of how far this has gone. But it's not like it is not a naturally, it's not like it's a special kind of oil that only comes out of the ground in Taiwan. It's a 3 or 4 year project in peacetime. it is a 3 or 4 year project to make sure that we have these capabilities in the United States. Maybe more than that, maybe we'd have to kidnap some Taiwanese engineers. I don't know.
But it's also when you consider the machine that makes the chips is a Dutch company, ASML. So the machinery that actually does the manufacturing of the chips is from the Netherlands. So you could relocate that to other parts of the world.
The intricacies of the supply chain, like I do believe.
Oh yeah, I know it's massive, but it's not like the modern world.
The modern world would not end. I do believe that there are certain cutting edge engineering capacities that are only present on the island of Taiwan at this moment. I know that ASML is another vital part of that, but that's there are a lot of parts of the supply chain. Okay, so that's in peacetime. If we put serious effort into this would take 3, 4, I don't know, maybe 10 years to bring all those capacities back to the United States. In time of war, it would take a month or two.
No.
It's like the reasons that they're really complicated, long-standing economic and supply chain and labor costs and yes, deep expertise that has been built in Taiwan. These are all soft factors that have developed over decades or what have you. And if we want to correct those through a subsidy here or there or bullying the leadership of TSMC, that's going to take a lot of time and it'll be of indifferent success. If we're at war with China and we desperately need a sort of a capacity that we are missing, we can brute force engineer that with, $1 trillion and all the engineering capacity in the United States aimed at it in 3 months. It's not a real problem.
So the classic example that I should have cited here is COVID and the rampage towards mRNA vaccines. In the normal course of events, it takes decades to get a new vaccine approved, especially a vaccine with new technology involved. I know there's a lot of people who are suspicious of that development or think there was some kind of sinister plot there. I am not among them. What did happen that was extraordinary is that when the world and the US economy were upended by COVID in 2020, obviously a vastly more important and systemically significant change than the complete disappearance of the island of Taiwan would be. When that happened, priorities shifted. And when priorities shift, miraculous things can happen very quickly. It is a far, far, far more difficult thing to push a completely new vaccine technology through the federal government approval apparatus and develop it, produce it, do this completely new thing. It is a far, far more difficult thing to do that than to try to replicate this set of technological requirements to build the chips that they have in Taiwan. That is much, much easier thing. And if it were truly systemically important, the way that mRNA vaccines became in 2020, it would happen very, very quickly because it would become a priority. Things would change to make it happen. Very clearly, that has never happened. The extent to which this Taiwan semiconductor thing is not really any kind of priority for the US government was made very clear during the Biden administration, and now it's just being shouted at us, from the rooftops by the Trump administration. The big thing, the most significant investment that the United States made to try to deal with this really crucially important chip question was dumping most of $10 billion into Intel. Intel is a largely failed company. It is not a national champion that we should be proud of. It is a company with a market capitalization that I think is either just above or just below the amount of money that Intel has poured into buying its own stock over the past 25 years. It's not it actually gives, I think, a window into what the US government's true priority is, which is shareholder value. And Intel was being saved not because Intel was the national security resource we needed to build chips, but because a lot of donors to the Republican and the Democratic parties are still wrapped up in Intel. And so Intel was given this big handout by the Biden administration. And it was that's I think the main thing to show just how not serious the United States is about most national security things, is we continue to funnel all this stuff through largely failed behemoth companies that are much more about corporate manipulation and shareholder value than they are about achieving any sort of national goals. This is true of the entire defense establishment, the entire all of the weapons manufacturing companies, obviously. And now it's unfortunately becoming a part of Silicon Valley. And I think that the Biden administration's relationship with Intel, sort of all free money, no consequences, was emblematic of this. And of course, the Trump administration has made it even worse. People have been condemning the Trump administration's approach to the same Intel program, with a lot of the same money, by the way, not something that's being mentioned as much, as a socialistic thing, because the Trump administration is trying to, trying to own the company and taking a slice of the company, and that's like a nationalization. And oh my, if only that were true. I actually think that rhetorically and on some levels what the Trump administration is better and wiser than what Biden is doing, to the extent that it can be seen as socialist. The idea that like the Trump administration was actually taking a 10% stake in this company and was going to guide it in more national security directions actually makes a lot of sense. But if you look at the fine print, that is in fact the opposite of what they were doing. The Biden administration was providing money to Intel under like some programmatic requirements. There were opportunities for the government to take the money back if Intel wasn't doing what it was supposed to be doing. And it gave the Biden administration some scope for directing what Intel might do. The fine print of the agreement with Trump is that, in fact, like, he's giving up all of that. Like, the Trump administration, well, the U.S. government now has 10% of Intel, but it explicitly gives up its ability to direct anything. All of the careful, boring, classic democratic neoliberal components and requirements that the Biden administration put on Intel, those are all wiped away. This is really just another stock buyback. The Trump administration's approach to this, even though it looks nominally like something that's more forceful, is just handing a big pile of money to Intel and jacking up the share price, which is it's done successfully. But we're not actually serious about this chips issue. It's been since 2022 now. Nothing serious has been done or accomplished. And it's a different industry, but it is high-tech manufacturing being brought back to the United States. Donald Trump's arrest of a bunch of South Korean engineers that were helping to build up a electric car and battery plant in Georgia is obviously just smashing the idea that we're going to somehow be getting Taiwanese or South Korean or, I don't know, Japanese engineers to come here and build factories in the United States again. So, like, there's no seriousness about this. This is not something that is actually a thing that the U.S. government really cares about. It is exclusively a justification. It's another in a long line of justifications and a grab bag of reasons why we could possibly justify fighting World War III over Taiwan. It's a rationalization. It's not a real thing, as indicated by the actions of the U.S. government over the past 3 years.
The idea that, like, this is some kind of massive national security issue, like, what's changing, and what is changing exclusively by choice of the United States, is the United States has gotten sick of the old system that we built and has decided it's a problem and we want to change it now. And okay, that's a decision that we can make, but the idea that it's like some incontrovertible law of nature and not like a very contingent thing that happened, that there's a certain set of engineers on Taiwan that are particularly useful, is it just the way that it's been fetishized, the way that it's become the only thing that a lot of national security fanboys know about Taiwan is strikes me as quite silly. And the idea that it's it's made out to be something that's much more important. There's a second half to that, which is the propaganda elements of it and the fact that this was a very concrete choice that was made. I'm seeing real parallels between this and between what was done in Israel. If you've heard of Israel as the startup nation, have you heard about
Yes,
that?
I've heard of
This
this.
is something that Netanyahu is very, very proud of. And it's often just like, as with many things about Israel's self-presentation, the fact that there's an occupation there, the fact that there's a lot of the country is geared towards war is just sort of left out of that. Like, oh, Israel, that's the place with like a lot of the techno music and cute people on the beach of Tel Aviv, right? Like, and that's sort of the startup nation story that sort of leaves out everything. The reason that Israel is such a locus of engineering is mostly national security related. It's all spy technology. It's all security, technology security stuff. It's all, it is absolutely a set of wealthy people in the United States that are making pro-Israel choices in alignment with U.S. defense policy to locate a lot of more and more important technological stuff in Israel, which makes Israel more valuable to the United States and makes it easier to sell the fact that we are really, really invested in this country on the other side of the world to the U.S. public and U.S. taxpayers. Like, how could you possibly give up Israel? I think we saw J.D. Vance making this argument recently. It's like, oh my God, we'd give up all that incredible knowledge and investment on missile defense, which is like our money, our investment, are like that we chose to put in
Yeah.
Israel. And I think that on some levels, like all these weird soft factors that created this big semiconductor industry in Taiwan, yeah, some of that was just like, oh, this is just the right, economically rational thing around labor choices, and Taiwan had worked up the value chain to a certain point. But part of it is absolutely conscious choice by the US government to pour billions of dollars to create vulnerable industries in Taiwan. Like that's does that sound like overly conspiratorial to you?
No,
Or
it's not.
like
Well, it's maybe more. I feel like Taiwan might be a bit more organic.
more organic than the
Yeah.
Israel thing? Than Israel? I think so, but it's also not. But Taiwan is also not organic.
Mm.
Like Israel is obviously a much easier, a much more distasteful project because it is just so transparently built on the backs of oppression, occupation, apartheid, and genocide. Taiwan is like as, if not vastly more artificial than Israel is. I mean, it exists as a country because the U.S. Navy kept the Chinese Civil War from being finished
Mhm.
in the 1940s. Like it is like this is why there is a Taiwan. And before and after we decided to start engaging with China again in the 1970s, we've poured billions and billions and billions of dollars into economic development in Taiwan. So yeah, this is not just some like, oh man, like like the whole, to finally answer the question, the whole like TSMC thing is not, this ineradicable resource that can only be done in Taiwan, but it's also important to question when this is mentioned as this be all and end all thing, like why did that happen? I think to think a little harder about why that happened, and maybe we shouldn't be letting it be used for exactly the propaganda
Mhm.
purposes it was hoped, to be used for. So that's my perhaps too long answer on TSMC.
To close, I'd like to return to a really basic idea here. It's the United States that is making this system as it existed, say, before 2022, unviable. It is U.S. choices that put a lot of the world's high-end semiconductor chip manufacture in Taiwan. It's U.S. choices that did that in a U.S. system, a system of U.S. empire, U.S. hegemony, whatever you want to call it, that worked for us and we liked. We have decided that we don't like that. And I think that this video might be caricatured as like anti-Taiwan in some way, as if it was somehow helping Taiwan to create this illusion that like we should be potentially blowing up semiconductor plants to make China angry. It is not, in fact, a pro-Taiwan stance to say that there's all these semiconductors here that make it necessary to fight a war over Taiwan. Like, fighting a war over Taiwan would utterly destroy Taiwan. Like, Taiwan is, 25, 30 million people who live this miraculous, really pleasant existence as like a very weird outgrowth of American empire as it was. In the harsher, more violent world of relations between China and the United States, Taiwan simply no longer exists, and in fact gets destroyed violently. So it's not, in fact, a pro-Taiwan thing to invent more reasons to fight wars over Taiwan. So I heavily dispute that promoting this Taiwan chip semiconductor thing was like some kind of like pro-Taiwan thing to do. In fact, I think it's of the greatest enemies of Taiwan who are doing that. Those who want to start World War III over Taiwan are really Taiwan's greatest enemies. It's hard to say whether open war between the United States and China would result in Shanghai getting nuked, in Los Angeles getting nuked, but it would absolutely, through conventional weapons alone, result in the flattening and destruction of Taiwan. So it's, in fact, a great thing that this whole Taiwan semiconductor mess fantasy is floating away and is no longer something that seems real. The greatest recent indication of that would be in September. The Biden administration, the Trump administration were like, well, we're going to limit what kind of chips you can have from the best chip company, NVIDIA, that works very closely with TSMC in Taiwan. We're going to limit what kind of stuff can go to China of NVIDIA. And in September, China was like, you know what? Actually, we're just going to ban NVIDIA chips. A key part of this narrative that I haven't been talking about is that these chips are so special and so important is because they're going to build the robot god AIs. And China and the US are like frantically running towards building these robot god AIs. And China has basically said, yeah, we're not interested in that. That's not a race we're actually doing. And if all of Silicon Valley, if they were capable of looking at stuff honestly, would be like, oh, wait a second. This is a race that only we are running. And it does put into question whether it's actually a race that is worth running at all. And that's what I have to say about Taiwan Semiconductors. Thanks so much for watching. Please do like, comment, subscribe, and come back here. Every 6 days now for the past 6 weeks, we've been producing long-form content here on the main channel. It's been great getting back into that. We also have podcasts every Monday at MoFreedomFoundation podcast, available Spotify, everywhere else. I can be found on Twitter at RoboLaw, on Blue Sky at MoFreedomFoundation. And we'd really love it if you'd consider signing up on Patreon. We've got a lot of great content coming out every week, but twice a month we do patrons-only content. There is the Patrons Newscast, only for the patrons, where patrons get me to look into the news events of the month. We do that every month. We do a presentation on that. There should be one of those coming up in the next couple days. We also do a Discord chat on the patrons only Discord server where we just get to have a conversation, kind of like a Zoom call. We do that every month as well. And of course, there is the patrons only Discord server, which is a phenomenal resource. I start a lot of my research now on that server, but it's just a bunch of smart folks who really care about the world talking about it. And it's honestly a really elevated conversation. It's a lot smarter than anything you'd find in a lot of nominally serious foreign policy publications. So anyway, yeah, thanks so much for being here. Please do like, subscribe, and sign up on Patreon if you'd be willing. Thanks so much.